Hello everyone, a brief video about the Hellenistic shield patterns today that, as we will see, mostly date to Antigonian times and we get from, at least largely from coins. Not much surviving actually from the Seleucids, the Attalids, and practically nothing from the Ptolemies, which is also interesting. In any case, the most iconic and famous Macedonian shield designs, as those of the various Hellenistic kingdoms that followed them, have two common features. One is the 8-pointed stars, sometimes elaborated to 16 depending on the additional rays, and that you might think of a sun practically, but it's still, a star in fact, and which was common also elsewhere than properly Macedon and the later Hellenistic kingdoms were somewhat universal solar symbols of celestial power, but it seems to have become a Macedonian national or dynastic emblem. In the 4th century, today's state of Macedon still has it in the flag. Also, the Greek province of Macedon has the same symbol. And the other design, most typical, is the symmetrical geometric ones based on several crescents arranged around the circumference, so forming this kind of, again, cosmic astral geometrical circles, symmetric to the center, and therefore always giving this idea of centrality of a power and then the revolution around it of all the rest of the world. You know that the crescent is one of the oldest symbols, was used since Sumerian times. In fact, it's the symbol of rising power. Would pass to, in fact, the Hellenistic powers, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, and beyond. So it's pretty universal as well. And what we are looking at today is properly how these symbols fundamentally appeared on the shield's surface, right, as shield patterns, not very differently from the from later, say, depictions like we can see on the Roman scuta, for example. I made a video about the Roman shield patterns. We'll keep making them, but in the Macedonian case it's a bit different because of the composition of the shields, right? That, as you know, were something else, framed within the phalangitic tactics, was particular. And in fact, we don't have much evidence of painting, although that existed. So most of the symbols were properly engraved. We have a fragment of bronze shield facing from Dodona. It's a famous find, which has a pattern of crescents worked in relief, and it basically shows, if I remember correctly, that it's because I couldn't find pictures for all of these, because as we will see, examples that I'm basically listing in, just providing with the source because of copyright issues and so on. But what you see is practically a star enclosed by, in this case, two crescents that enclose each other in turn, and there, if the pattern continues, probably the entire shield would have showed all around. The circumference would have been practically symmetric with the center circularly. And there are also painted examples, and the issue here is that we can see, as often happens with this type of source, whether what material was depicted in the image, and it's possible that the nature of the troops and the attached value to the shield symbolism really was determining the engraving rather than any form of painting on it, right? As you know, in the Hellenic tradition, from which also the Macedonian tactics, that is another thing compared to the classical Peletic one, but still relying heavily on the infantry concept as it had been phalangitically developed, relied much on the shield per se, right? The Greeks called the name of their units on the base of their shields, right? The Romans on the base of their weapons. A completely different mindset in a way regarding properly the function of the infantry. But as you know, in the Macedonian army, I made a video about the Antigonid one some time ago. You can find that, and we'll keep talking about that hopefully. There were different units, one called the Caspidas, that is literally bronze shield, right? Calcis is bronze, and the aspis is the shield. So this would mean literally that the face looked bronze, right? So these were bronze-faced shield bearers, and the shields brought their geometric designs in relief, fundamentally. And there is, in fact, any sign, even archaeologically, that any part of the design was picked out with paint. We just see them properly engraved. Then there were the Argoraspidas, the silver shields, probably having similar shields, partly or wholly plated in silver, or tin at least, which would be cheaper, but still giving the literally a standard face of silver. That also from the distance was a big deal. I mean, the idea of making it shiny. If you look even at just what the appearance of the troops were from the tomb of Lyson and Calicus, you know that, and this is true for basically any other source from medieval ancient times, everything was dramatically colorful, right? They, ancient helmets, medieval helmets looked like, the shiny, almost lacquered ones of, today's motorcycle helmet. Like they were extremely colored and shiny, and they had to provide this incredibly, probably essential appearance of the value that also the color and the symbol attached to it was meant to embody. And so you understand that these shields bearing the symbol of stars were to shine in this regard. The Macedonian Leo Caspidas, so instead the light shields, are a bit less clear, also from the more general documentation. But the bronze facing of a shield of a phalange type from Pergamon had no relief design, so it's possible that this may have had shields with white painted grounds, right, with any blazon painted on to make the white shields. Then there are actually a multitude of finds also predating essentially the timeline we're taking in consideration here, that is roughly the mid-4th century. Some of this evidence also is lost. For example, we have a clay model from a Macedonian tomb of the early 4th century, which is the earliest known Macedonian shield blazon that I know, at least, that shows the star alone, quite simply, and therefore, showing essentially already in its perfection the sun, the star symbol. It also probably predates Philip II reforms, right? So the Macedons already used this symbolism before properly the phalangitic, rather tactics more than units, right? Because as you know, what we speak of the phalanx, like as I was saying before, is actually the combined tactics that as such did not exist in ancient Greece. But of course, the Macedons also had their own kind of phalanx before that. And this clay model shows also the flat rim of the hoplite shield, in this sense that makes the point, and that was designed practically also to fence off the blow once it, given that the shield was convex right from the center, so that blows would be diverted towards the external, but this rim was used not to make the tip of the blade, going towards some other part, given that we're not also dramatically the same size that the older classical hoplitic shield really was. There were different sizes, and as you know, the Macedonian ones were smaller when the pike was introduced, right? So these were already those times, and therefore this also smaller shield probably shows the need not to have the tip of the deflected blow kind of hitting at the immediate outer side of the shield behind it. So probably somewhere that was already not protected, if not by some armor, but still being human body. And no blazons attributable to Philip II and Alexander III are known, sadly enough. So basically the greatest conqueror in the history of mankind doesn't have basically a documented blazon in his own times, even though there are naturally coins struck since the time of Alexander that show similar symbols to the aforementioned ones. We have a shield pattern from the coins of Patraios of Paeonia. There was probably Alexander's contemporary. And the picture here, I don't think I inserted it, but it's still like a four pointed star with some globals, four globals around it. And what is interesting about this representation, though, is not much the pattern itself, but the fact that the shield on which is displayed is carried by an infantryman in trousers and helmet. So the trousers would normally point to an Achaemenid, some kind of Persian Asian style, right? And this guy, equipped more like, say, wearing trousers but being equipped like kind of a phalangite with a shield and legs, is ridden down by a Paeonian cavalryman. So Paeonia was this area next to Macedon, and also famous bit for cavalry, bit like the surrounding ones. And there was a scholarly association of the pattern with the killing of a Persian officer by Ariston, leader of Alexander's Paeonians, right? But the problem is that this Achaemenid was a cavalry officer, right? And the guy in the coin looks like an infantryman, and even, say, not maybe an average one, but one that could be like in a phalanx of some sort. So rather than just also the trousers per se and the blazon per se, but this figure looks like either an Achaemenid in Macedonian employ, or the coin may relate to an otherwise unknown incident in the wars of the successors. It's also possible that the trousers were adopted by someone. Of course, in the coin, that would mostly picture a specific meaning, right, in a specific kind of ethnic clothing to associate. But this mix is quite interesting, so you may never fully understand what it is. It's true that the Balkans had been heavily influenced by Persian warfare in a way or another, and so maybe even clothing, even if the Achaemenid invasions were distant in time, relatively so, still there was an important influence. We'll never know, but it's interesting to notice. Then there is another similar pattern with a 8 pointed star and other, here, how many are they? 7 globals all around and some other circular decoration around, from a coin of Ialisos, that was the tyrant perhaps of Iasos in Caria, between the end of the 4th and the beginning of the 3rd century BC. And the center device, as I described it, is not entirely certain because the shield is shown in three-quarter view, right? And it's interestingly shown as the concave rimless Macedonian infantry type. Speaking of rims, here I inserted also some tureoi of especially the Sidon stales and all that stuff, and that's a bit another story because you see there mostly like there is a rim in the center, and the colors are like double, like on the two sides respectively, and those come probably conceptually from other from another view of properly of identity. Like the Macedons were much more universally focused, especially, but in general that was, I've seen in fact, the universal language. But the impression is that the tureos was worn by troops that didn't have such kind of universalistic ambitions per se. Even if they had it, they could have minor devices, etc. In those depictions, in those murals, we see mostly just two colors, so without any further complicated design of this kind. And it belonged mostly, as you know, in theory, in the tradition, to this more barbarian type of troops, right? Even though the tureos was adopted by the Hellenistic troops, also kind of the official ones in part, the regular ones. The maybe symbolism on average was less of, and the tureos maybe was kind of more attached to this kind of throwaway kind of troops, and so didn't deserve in the imperial hierarchy such devices. Who knows? But this is just my impression. But the idea that, I don't know, the Caspidas, the Argoraspidas, the Leo Caspidas would have had other symbolism of that sort is perhaps connected to that worldview. There is another symbol that is still the 8-pointed star with globals around and circles around from Aetolian coins. This one also interestingly being shown within a trophy with other shields of Celtic origin, because this was over the victory over the Celts in the Galatians in 279. So it may be a Macedonian shield looted by a Galatian, or having been carried by the Celts' Thessalian allies that were, roaming around. In any case, it's interesting because it's on top of the pile of the other shields, right? So it's an interest, and the victorious figure sits over it, so it's kind of interesting. And the other shields, the Celtic shields, as we were saying before, do not have that design, that pattern, which is much simpler, as we were just saying, because these other shields are tureoi, right? What the Galatians were credited having been brought in part in the Balkans, or they already existed conceptually in a sense as kind of smaller shields, but became more typical at that time, or also because of the Italic scuta of the Oscan mercenaries in Pyrrhus army around the same, in fact, in very same years. In fact, they are spread in these years in the Hellenistic armies. Then there is an interesting series of patterns that depict monograms. There is one of the same Pyrrhus, of Epirus, from a coin he minted as King of Macedon when he was in Pella. There are others from Demetrius Poliorcetes showing his monogram, others from Antiochus Gonatas that, however, maybe were kind of remakes at the time of Dolzon. This may not be so crucial, but still they are present, and this monogram is put like the sun, the star, at the center of the shield, with the circles and globular circles all around as well. So it's the idea of this guy at the center of the universe ruling it, right, marking his presence with the initial. Then there is, let's say, as we were saying before, a lot of Antigonic evidence there is one, for example, deriving from the famous painting celebrating Gonadas' marriage in 279. It was also copied by the Romans. Later on, there are famous frescoes about this, and it's the typical star with 8 rays. And in the fresco, it's depicted unequivocally as being in polished bronze, with the design in relief, so in line with the archaeological evidence. Then there is one from a coin of Gonatas that actually looks a bit like the fragment from Dodona, with the star and the these crescents enclosing the star from the center outward. The star is outward towards the rim. And interestingly enough, the center of the shield, instead than the star or even the monogram, as we have just seen, shows literally the face of the king depicted as Pan. I mean, the Pan part is not much the point. Is that rather, would kings' faces be engraved on shields or used in combat? Because there was some, kind of connection with that. I mean, think about the Gorgon was used on a political shield, patterns and so on. But let's say here we're talking about the monarchs, and it's as if the Romans Imperial Imago, that there was something a bit different from still the pretty heavily hierarchical and universalistic, ambitious Hellenistic kings, would have not been, used just as a shield, right, to get, I don't know, the blows just straight in the face. This is at least the main idea. The fact that these shields were probably made of bronze, and thus the same face in this case of the monarch being engraved, is that it was kind of more resistant than something painted right on wood, like it could be normally other types of non-phalangitic shields, and also in other armies that we've seen. Let's say it's actually possible that this was the case, telling the truth. And naturally, this is a coin. We get the iconography from, so coins could be something more properly emblematic, right? Like a good portrait to show still the fact that this guy was on the shield of troops, but let's say ideally so. But it's possible that these faces, and also considering the clashes, among the Adoki, sometimes it was something, right? The idea under whose guy and whose empire are you actually ruling? As we will see, there is also dramatic, for example, eagle and thunder symbolism. So just like in the Roman iconography, because again, the symbols were universal, every freaking where, right? And as we were saying before, the Dodona fragment has crescents like in some of these patterns without the small stars though. And Sporul captured by Pyrrhus from Antigonus Gonatas and dedicated at the famous oracle of Zeus, Dodonaios. A coin of Philip V of Macedon has a similar shield with 8 pointed stars. We have other evidence from the same and another coin of Philip, born by Athene instead of her usual Gorgon, interestingly enough. Then there is the extraordinary evidence from the tomb of Lyson and Callicles. That is a fresco, is a painted one. And from here we see essentially an artistic depiction of various shields. One is represented as polished bronze as well, with thunderbolts between the crescents, interestingly enough. So of the Godfather thunderbolt power. Then another shield with a very complex pattern that we can read from the outside in towards the center. So from the external to the center, white rim with red zigzag lines. Then dark red with pale green, blue, red. 4 circles patterned like coiled rope. They're very thick. If you see it here, I couldn't find a picture of, unfortunately, but it's famously from the Tome of Lison and Caligulus. Then all red blending from dark to orange. White circle, pale green, blue center with white star. Right. So something particularly, detailed, which is not. In the Hellenic art in general, that everything proceeded from the more simple and geometric that was mirroring those astral, the astral perfection to something ever more kind of even physiomorphic. Here you see the red, the laurel that also appears on some other evidence, for example, some of the reliefs of Pergamon at some point. But sticking to the last Macedonian evidence, we have actually Roman derived evidence, because there are the infantry shields from the Aemilius Paulus monument at Delphi that the Macedons had imposed to the Hellenes, as Delphi being the absolute universal religious sanctuary of the world, impressing their dominators' mark on, and simply the Romans, by taking over Macedon and Greece, they instead simply substituted themselves to that, commemorating the Roman victory at Pydna over the Antigonids. And this evidence shows from literally, I think it's, in this case is properly the monument with a Macedonian fighter showing this shield is interestingly complex in a way. Then there is another evidence for Roman coins with Aemilius Paulus depicted as a knight riding over after in the victory over Macedon, riding literally over one of these shields, figuring this pattern. So the Romans basically identified themselves that globular symbolism of the Antigonid emblems as the symbol of Macedon herself. We have a coin from the district of Amphixitis, probably dating to Perseus' reign, so before the Theid, with this whirly jig motive that is called Strobulus. It's similar to a swastika essentially, and in fact it's derived from the star, the sun, and this sort of symbolism. And it's like the star is like in the center with some circles around, and then there's other globular globules with the smaller strobili in the center and some dots around, springing from this in between. Then there is a coin from Macedonia Prima, one of the Roman puppet states formed after Pydna in republican form over after having crashed the Antigonic monarchy. As we were saying at the beginning, there is actually not much further evidence beyond the Antigonid one. The Seleucids show similar symbolism with crescents on the external and the Seleucid anchor in the center. The anchor is disputed in symbolism. It existed already in Alexander's times. There are some hypotheses regarding to it. Some legend, Macedonian generals stumbling to an anchor just outside Babylon before conquering it, or it was seen like this point of arrival for the safe haven, let's say for the merchants to stop in northern Syria to colonize from Macedon, settling in the local cities. This is not much the point. The point is that the kind of original Macedonian pattern is pretty much similar, still derived from the one of the shield. Again, think how important how the shield was in the at this point, Hellenistic mentality, right? To make all of it properly a symbol of world domination per se, even in the broader iconography, for example, on the coins, etc. The Romans didn't have this. They were much more of their equestrian ideal, right, of the knight riding over the enemy, over the fallen enemy, things like these. So even a much more kind of crystal idea of power, right? This derived from the hardcore original Dorian religion, in the European religion, that was probably the one that had founded in self, say, in confidence and self-awareness, the idea that the order established by these conquerors had not to be minimally changed, right? A bit of, even of the later, let's say, of the Hellenic kind of detachment, alienation times. I don't know. They didn't even wanted to accept they were subjugated to the Romans, and even in Byzantine times, this idea of the perpetua sanctio, the unalterable order, right? It does stem powerfully from these traditions as well. Speaking of the Seleucid coin of Antiochus the first, that the anchor was carried this way up is confirmed. Because it's upside down compared to what you would think, by a coin celebrating a late Seleucid Ptolemaic alliance as well. It has Athene's shields blazoned with the anchor, and even the Ptolemaic eagle in that case. So this is pretty interesting. And so it's not that we don't have symbols from Ptolemy. Here we're talking about shield patterns, properly as known as from the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, etc. From the Ptolemies, zero, right? From the Seleucids, these few. There was one bearing a portrait of Antiochus IV, later times, so similar to what we've seen partly in Antigonian times and even before. There are various sources. A Seleucid one is one with the laurel. Then we find in the Attalid world was kind of still, Pergamene, but heavily Seleucid and still partly Antigonic influence. Some complex designs that are a bit similar to vaguely at least in terms of complexity, to the one we documented before, the second one we documented in the paintings of Lyson and Caligula's tomb, and they, like in these reliefs, like other equipment carved in this iconographic source, they may be Pergamene, Attalid, in fact, panoplies, but are more likely Seleucid trophies, right? We also have other more complex, but still kind of this central cross star with globular symbols around, coming, for example, from the town of Philadelphia, founded by Attalus Philadelphus. In fact, we're speaking of 139-138 BC in reign, right? So pretty late. As we were just repeating, there is no such thing like a Ptolemaic blazon. No. Given the prominence of eagles that are to be found also among the Antigonids, also in later times, and that was a pretty standard solar symbol. Also in Egypt there was some, as you know, legacy of that with the falcon and all. It's possible that this, together with the thunderbolt, right, pretty much like the Romans, like the eagle and thunderbolt with Jupiter, and properly the eagle, with the thunderbolt between his claws, right, like the later Roman legionary standards, or a lion's head may have been part of the symbol. So just again, the same symbols universally shared by all these peoples. And this is pretty much it. So this was just for the sake of completion, given that we are talking about Hellenistic warfare in some detail, and probably we will keep adding on it because it's always interesting and underappreciated in my opinion. So for today, stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.